Hi, Dan.
Hey, Rachel, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. It's sort of nice to come back and do these follow-up sessions, isn't it?
It always is. We had so many questions this week, and I'm really glad that we have a chance to answer some more of them.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. What were the ones that you picked out that you thought were the most interesting that we didn't get to?
Yeah, so I thought we could start with local politics. So the first audience member asked, what impact do you think the current city council scandal will have on the Democratic coalition here in LA?
Boy, it's a great question. And what I would say is that the Democratic coalition in Los Angeles is really, at this point, two different types of Democratic parties. There's a more establishment centrist Democratic Party, a Biden party, if you will. And then there's a much more progressive, often self-proclaimed socialist wing of the party. We'll call that, for sake of argument, the Bernie wing. And what's interesting about the three city council members who are implicated on that audio recording is all of them, even though they're all very progressive by any conventional measuring stick, all three are part of the political establishment here in Los Angeles. And the progressive challengers who've been winning council seats in recent years and in this primary really seem poised to gain the most from this controversy. Now, in the mayor's race, both Karen Bass and Rick Caruso, in very, very different ways, are very much establishment candidates. And so it's a bit more complicated to think through whether one or the other of them will benefit more than the other in the mayoral campaign. But I would say that over the next few years at City Hall, the progressive wing of the Democratic Party is definitely ascendant, and this most recent controversy only intensifies that advantage.
So turning now to national politics, as we approach the midterms, inflation has been on many voters' minds. We had a question related to this quote from James Carville, who in 1992, when he was a strategist for Bill Clinton's campaign for president, hung a sign in their campaign office that said, "It's the economy, stupid," to hammer home to staffers how key the issue was in the campaign. So the audience member asked, when has Carville's statement not been true and not determined a midterm result? Is there really a chance that it won't do so this time?
Boy, it's a great question, because in almost every election, ultimately economic issues are those that are most impactful on the voters' decisions. And one of the most interesting wrinkles in these midterms is that voters who are concerned about inflation, primarily, but other economic measures as well, tend to favor Republicans in very large numbers. That said, those voters who prioritize issues like abortion rights, particularly in the aftermath of the Dobbs decision and other healthcare issues, support Democrats in very, very large numbers also. But as we move through the fall and gasoline prices continue to rise again, that does seem like it's working in the favor of Republicans as we get closer to Election Day. Last spring, as we talked about on the last webinar, it looked like Republicans were in a very strong position for the midterms because of voters' concerns about inflation and the economy. By late summer, early fall, voter concerns about abortion rights had grown to a significant degree, so it looked like Democrats had pretty much closed the gap. But now as gasoline prices start to go up again, that definitely works to the Republicans' benefit. And coming all the way back to your question, when Carville said 30 years ago now that it's the economy, stupid, that generally is the political rule of thumb in almost every election, unless there are issues of war and peace on the ballot. So if you look at elections that have taken place during wartime or in the immediate aftermath of the September 11th terrorist attacks, then military and security issues might rise to a higher level. But in every other circumstance, particularly when voters are uneasy about their economic circumstances, they tend to vote their pocketbook. And while that certainly doesn't guarantee anything for November, it does seem to give Republicans an advantage that might not have been the case even just a month or two ago.
So turning to our final question, which again is switching gears a bit to more international affairs. So this audience member asked, do you think that the Saudi Arabian OPEC decision was more about the Iran nuclear deal than any Russian-Ukraine issue?
It's such a smart question. And there's no question whatsoever that OPEC and Saudi Arabia's decision to reduce their output has had a very, very important effect on the war in Ukraine, on the US economy, and on a number of other policy and political fronts as well. But the questioner is really smart to raise the question of Iran because that connection hasn't gotten nearly as much attention in the past as whether the decision might have been motivated by the Ukraine war, by US domestic politics and other things. So the question is, it's worth remembering that Saudi Arabia and Iran are mortal enemies. And one of the most important changes in Middle Eastern geopolitics over the last generation is this coalition of Gulf states led by Saudi Arabia that have been increasingly confrontational toward Iran. So when Saudi Arabia and OPEC decide to lower gasoline prices or oil prices, and by the way, it's worth remembering that Iran is a member of OPEC, it's entirely possible that the pressures on the United States would make it less likely rather than more likely that the United States would pursue a nuclear arms agreement with Iran. Now, if you remember, as I know most of our audience does, Barack Obama, back when he was president, agreed to a very, very controversial nuclear arms reduction, nuclear production agreement with Iran. Donald Trump, when he was president, reversed that policy. Joe Biden, since taking office, has said that he does want to see a nuclear agreement with Iran, but hasn't put nearly as much time and effort into it. And I could certainly see how, in addition to the other ramifications of Saudi Arabia's decision on oil prices, they might decide that the impact that this decision has on US politics, specifically in terms of potentially weakening Joe Biden and Biden's Democratic Party, would make it much, much less likely that after the midterms, a fortified Republican Congress would sign off on any nuclear agreement with Iran. So it's not nearly as straightforward a connection as Ukraine or gasoline prices. But if you do believe, as most people do, that Democrats are more likely to support an arms agreement, a nuclear agreement with Iran than Republicans are, then in a political environment before the election in which gasoline prices go up and Republicans realize gains, as we were talking about in the previous question, that's something that could accrue to Saudi Arabia's benefit by derailing, or at least minimizing, the likelihood of a UN-Iran deal. So I realize that's a very complicated and very intricate, but it is a smart question. And I'm really glad that our audience member raised it. Like usual, Rachel, I never cease to be impressed by how well informed our group is. And that question is a perfect example of it. They're not easy to keep up with, our group.
Completely agreed. They always have the best questions. And thank you so much for sharing that insight, Dan.
Absolutely. And I'm already looking forward to our next program. So I will see you again in the very near future.
Yes, I am too. We have live streams on October 25th and the 8th and the 17th, all of November, all covering the midterms. So very excited to see everyone then, and hopefully to see a lot of our audience for our in-person breakfast on November 3rd as well.